From cringy marketing tactics and production dilemmas to awful direction and cheap CGI, some movies are just not meant to be. And you don't need a release to figure that out. I'm sure some names come to your mind. Let's compare notes. First up, what in the world was Artemis Fowl? The 2020 film Artemis Fowl had a number of elements that seemed to do well for its success. Success that never came. How could Kenneth Branagh's film, which was based on a series of best-selling novels and starred Colin Farrell and Judi Dench, receive an abysmal 8% on Rotten Tomatoes? One reason that I can think of is that it differs greatly from the book. And in 2020, we didn't really need a hero as the primary character. That plot's been done before. In effort to appeal to a more commercial audience, the movie also significantly watered down several of the novel's most crucial plot points, which ultimately had the opposite effect. The screenplay appeared to have been torn to shreds and weaved back together, according to one critic. Yikes. But sometimes people just be hatin'. I'm referring to the review bombing that tanked Eternals. This often happens when movies touch social topics, with fake accounts disparaging works for their inclusion of varied characters or what they perceive to be social justice. Plot lines involving feminism, race, or the LGBTQ community are often seen as a massive issue. Yes, still, even in this day and age. The most recent illustration of this is Eternals from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The inclusion of Phastos, the first openly gay superhero of the MCU, in Eternals drew a wave of unfavorable responses. Phastos is spotted kissing his husband and cuddling with his kids in the trailer, literally for a split second. But much of the review bombing brought this to light by calling it a conscious pandering. Eternals had some of the lowest review ratings of any MCU product in recent years. But one aspect that critics praised was its diversity. There you go, haters. The movie scored horribly for entirely different reasons. The action scenes and the visuals, bland. Now that's something to be mad about. Something similar happened with Black Panther. Currently, both fans and critics agree that it's one of MCU's highest-rated movies. The movie is adored by viewers and made over $1 billion in revenue, especially in the wake of star Chadwick Boseman's tragic and untimely death. Yet, there were review bombing operations against the movie before it was released and even soon after. Some people were offended by Disney and Marvel for telling the tale of an African king and superhero, and for portraying Wakanda as a technologically advanced nation with an Afro-futuristic aesthetic, believing it to be a woke show. Sometimes nothing brings people together like hating on a movie. That's what happened with Super Mario Bros. In 1993. Turns out, nobody wants to hear a middle-aged man on the big screen yelling, "It's-a me, Mario." This movie was hated by everyone in every demographic. Parents, kids, and critics alike tore the movie to pieces. The main issue with the terrible movie is that it was a peculiar and spooky distortion of the beloved video game, rather than anything that looked or felt like it. Maybe today we might appreciate the weird, almost cyberpunk atmosphere of the film, but 30 years ago, it was difficult to see it as anything less than a catastrophe. Right now, it might just be camp, like the Gen Z kids call it. Except for the visual issues, the picture was doomed from the start as a result. That's for having 9 different writers on board and production running well over schedule. Large-scale actors like Dennis Hopper had their lines abruptly modified, which led to an on-set argument with the directors. It's a little difficult to hold them responsible after seeing the movie now. Then there were some movies that caught the curse of a big-budget action bug. Remember John Carter? I know some of you are having war flashbacks. Not all films with colossal flaws are doomed to failure. Looking back, Disney's infamous John Carter is a perfectly mediocre movie that suffered a box office loss of nearly $200 million. Still, that may be one of the biggest sins for a high-budget action film. Strangely enough, a huge portion of the movie's budget was allocated to marketing. But in the end, audiences literally fled theaters because of its string of uninteresting, confused trailers. And because the studio catered to people who were already familiar with the original material, a good chunk of the audience was unclear as to what John Carter was even attempting to accomplish. There didn't seem to be much interest in this Mars adventure when the first trailer debuted. But what it did get was a lot of discussion on its, should I call it, peculiarity. Also, sometimes it's best not to go for a sequel, like in the case of Shazam 2. Shazam! Fury of the Gods box office is now expected to bomb miserably. Predictions indicate that the sequel will debut to lower numbers than the first. Just how low? It could debut with a low of $43 million, which would make it the second lowest dceu film. In fact, initial estimates call for an even smaller opening of $35 million. To give you an idea, the 2019 Shazam film's debut took in $53.5 million at the box office and ended up earning $140.3 million domestically. It also made $225.6 million abroad, with $43.8 million of it coming from China, for a total revenue of $366 million. If you're wondering why you're not hearing about this movie, I've got news. They've got no money to promote it. The company's lack of funds and cost-cutting initiatives have included removing episodes off of HBO Max in order to sell them to other services, and scrapping Batgirl for tax-related reasons. According to sources, Warner Bros. Discovery only had enough money in August to market 2 movies for the rest of the year. One of them was Black Adam, and the other was Don't Worry Darling. With a $35 million budget before marketing, Shazam! Fury of the Gods' $78 million box office take may roll the movie out, but it's insufficient to cover the at least $50 million marketing spend required for a movie of this caliber. That's just embarrassing. But wait, let's talk about a movie that Bad Gal Riri wants you to forget about. Battleship is conclusive evidence for the few wannabe filmmakers out there that you might want to pause before creating a live-action movie based on a board game. In this instance, what was meant to be a blockbuster movie, like Transformers, turned out to be a complete failure. Battleship, like John Carter, isn't inherently a poor film as opposed to just being generic. But it just didn't work for summer blockbuster crowds, especially kids who were already familiar with the game. It was incredibly difficult to tie the game into the alien invasion plot in the end. And the fact that Taylor Kitsch wasn't well known didn't help. Even though Liam Neeson and Rihanna were in the film, it still felt more and more like an SNL sketch. And sometimes, movies get caught up within wars, quite literally. It's what happened with The Promise in 2016. Once more, review bombing revealed a dark side. The Armenian genocide, a crime against humanity committed during the First World War, is intrinsically tied to the narrative of The Promise. The movie stars big names like Oscar Isaac and Christian Bale, but even that couldn't save it. The Promise received hundreds of 1-star ratings before it was released, but fewer 10-star reviews. The 10-star reviews were seen as a reaction against the 1-star reviews, which were thought to be a coordinated campaign by Armenian genocide denialists. Well, that's all for the movies that got bombed before release.